በዛሬው ዕለት በመናስጀምረው ሁለተኛው ዩኒትና አጠቃላይ የግድቡ የሥራ ውጤት እንኳን ለድልም እንኳን ለእድልም አበቃችሁ ለማለት እወዳለሁ።
That is Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed at an inauguration event in Ethiopia on Wednesday. The Prime Minister congratulating Ethiopia and its people on new developments on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissiance Dam. The second turbine is now producing energy. A total of 13 turbines are expected to be operational at the end of the project. But what does it mean? Joining me today to discuss is water researcher Mekdelawit Deribe. Mekdelawit, thank you so much. This appears to be a big moment for Ethiopia, but what does it mean?
It is a big moment, and congratulations to you too and to everybody who's been supporting this project from the start. What does it mean? It's a big milestone for sure. Right, so like we've heard, the first turbine became operational a few months back, and now the second turbine is online. And these two turbines together, the installed capacity, we call it installed capacity, the total their potential to produce energy is 375 megawatts each. That's 750 megawatts total. And we've heard today from the media that together these two turbines are actually producing around 540 megawatts of energy, and that is huge. That's more than most of the dams that we already have operational in Ethiopia. It's more than the Tekeze Dam, let's say. That's just producing 300 megawatts. It's more than all the other smaller dams that we know of. Well, basically, except Gilgil Gibi 3. Most of the dams that are operational in Ethiopia are producing a lot less power than just these two turbines from the grid. And 540 megawatts for a country like Ethiopia, it's going to be monumental. I just did some rough calculations earlier, and 540 megawatts of energy for Ethiopia when it comes to the grid would mean, because in Ethiopia, for example, because our quality of life is really low and our energy consumption is really low, assuming every person uses around 100 kilowatt hours of energy per year. And this is a very, very low number compared to developed countries or even developing countries around us. Assuming every person uses around 100 kilowatt hours of energy per year, the energy from these two turbines is going to cater for more than 47 million people. And assume 6 people live in a household, right? So that's going to bring power to more than 7 million households. That's huge. That's significant. And if we were to export, and this is just an assumption, right? If we were to export the energy that we are getting from these two turbines at a price of, let's say, US dollar cents, that would be a revenue amount of, more than 283 million US dollars. So you cannot underestimate the impact of just these two turbines, and in general, the impact that the grid is going to have. It's going to be a monumental project, and already the fact that these two turbines are operational is going to bring significant change that is supposed to be felt by every individual. So it's magnificent. It's huge.
So for some clarity, so this second turbine is the one that is powering 47 million people or potentially 7 million households, or is it the first two total that are
both of them? Yeah. So so we have two turbines operational now. The installed capacity or the potential is 375 megawatts each. So that would be a total of 750 megawatts. But no turbine, no dam operates at 100% efficiency or at its 100% capacity all the time. So we've heard from the media that these two turbines together are each producing 270 megawatts each, and that brings up the sum to around 540 megawatts, and that amount of energy is what I translated to these numbers that I told you about earlier. And it's huge. It really is big, especially for a country like Ethiopia, where we don't already have currently we have around 40% energy access, where our quality of life is really low, so much so that our annual energy uses around 100 kilowatt hours per capita. That's nothing. Just for comparison, consider Egypt. Their per capita energy usage is around 15 1,500 at the 1,500 kilowatt hours of energy per capita per year. So that shows you the difference in the quality of life. That means we don't have access to electricity in our homes. That means we don't use television, radios, whatever, anything that uses energy in the house. We don't have it, right? So, and that has its own implications in the quality of life. But even with the lowest quality of life that we have now, this is going to the spread or the reach of just the impact of these two turbines is going to be far-reaching.
So
8 million households just from two turbines. That's significant. So you can only imagine like how well the grid can be like a very transformational project once the rest 11 come through, and the grid can be or the full power of the grid can be harnessed, right?
Right. That's an interesting point you make. It's not just that people who didn't have power before are going to have power, but the things that they're able to do with that power is going to change. So their quality of life is going to get better, right? So maybe they had power before, but they had to ration it or only use it for certain things, but now they can expand the things that they can actually use power for, right?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of building these dams or even the grid is not just so that we can have electricity in our houses, but also but also for each and every individual to have a decent quality of life, a dignified life, right? So we don't need to settle at this mediocre 100 kilowatt hours per capita per year. No, we're meant to have a better quality of life, and with that we need to increase our per capita energy consumption. It's just because the amount of electricity we produce and the reach that the energy that we produce doesn't have far-reaching implications. That's why our energy use and by proxy our quality of life is low. But for sure, that's the idea. It's not just access to energy, but it's better access to life, better access to a dignified life, a better quality of life, right? These are basic things like having lights in your house, having an electric cooking stove, or instead of, like, let's say, a firewood, having access to electricity so that you can study, so that your daily chores are easier, so that you don't have to spend days, hours and hours of your day fetching firewood or fetching water. These tangible changes in lifestyle, that's what we're talking about.
Right. And one of our viewers said, so you don't have to have any planned outages. I mean, and that is for those in the city who actually have access to some energy to begin with. And just the way that you're walking us through some of the potential activities that are now going to be powered, it actually takes some imagination for those of us who are used to having access to power to even be able to really imagine what kind of difference this makes for many people that don't have that kind of access in Ethiopia. So when we say these two turbines can power 7 million households, what does that mean? Is that happening immediately? Is there a process? Can you walk us through?
These are just numbers to sort of show you what's possible with the grid, right? I'm not saying 7 million households right away will get electricity now, but the two turbines, the energy energy produced from these two turbines has the capacity, right? How many houses it reaches, it's really dependent on our grid connection, right? Like, just because the power is there doesn't mean it's going to reach, let's say, these rural households. We do need the connection there. So it's conditional, right? It really depends on how the dam is managed, how well our infrastructure is well connected to the grid. So it's very conditional. But instead of saying we're just producing 500 megawatts of energy from these two turbines, this is just a way of contextualizing and trying to show people the reach and the extent and the transformative power that the grid and just these two turbines can have. So don't attach like so much real value to it, but this is just to put things in context, right? Because 500 megawatt means nothing. So it's just a way of putting it in a more relatable terms and in more realistic terms.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. But in general, what is the process? So, they inaugurate the second turbine. Maybe we have some data with the way they rolled it out on the first turbine to get a sense of what do they do next. So they inaugurate the second turbine. They say it can release all of this energy, or produce rather all of this energy. And then what? What do they do next to get it to the people?
So that question is a question of how the dam is going to be operated, and that's up to, I'm guessing, the Energy Corporation or the Ministry of the the mechanics of how they're going to operate it, that's up to them. But the good thing about the grid is that the grid, so like the energy that comes from the grid, can be connected to the grid because the connection, the transmission lines from the dam to the central grid is complete. That means that whatever energy that the grid is producing can go into the central grid and can be used like readily, right? So that's a big plus. Normally maybe the dam would be complete and then maybe it's the transmission lines are not complete. So whatever the dam is producing may not be readily available to use in the grid. But in the case of the grid, the transmission line has been done for numerous years now, which means whatever benefit that we get from the grid, whatever energy that the grid produces can be readily available to use at the grid, so, which is a big thing. But that again, that's not to say we still don't have infrastructure developments left to do, but at least it's a very good thing in the sense that what the grid produces can be straightly linked to the central grid and then can be used further according to the discretion of whoever's managing the dam or how the dam is going to be operated. Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to ask some very simple questions because I do think a lot of people don't actually understand the mechanics of how this all works. So I want to read down to that. So you said there's a central grid. So there's one grid somewhere where all of this energy is going to. Do we know where that is? I mean, I don't know if that's something that is
yeah. So energy distribution. So like you have multiple dams in Ethiopia, right? So Tekeze is producing energy. Gilgal-Gibe, all the cascades from Gilgal-Gibe are producing energy. So what happens is the energy produced from most of these dams, like there are off-grid energy producing infrastructures. So, but for the most part, energy produced from mega infrastructures goes into a central grid and then it's distributed to whatever needs it, houses, infra, industries, exports, all of that, right? So the energy is first produced in the dam and then it's transmitted to the grid. So the transmission lines are the ones that carry the energy that is produced in the dam and then connected to the grid. What happens to the energy after the grid? That's an operational question, and I don't have any information on that. I don't know how it's going to be managed, but the fact that energy that is readily produced in the dam can be fed into the central grid is a big plus, which it means the energy can be readily available for people to use, for industries to use, of course, upon the discretion of how it's going to be operated by the relevant organization.
And what are the limitations of this dam? I mean, Ethiopia is a very large country, over 110 million people. If you include the region with Eritrea and Somalia and Djibouti, we're talking about over 120 million people. You know, what's the reach and what are the limitations of this dam?
What's the reach? It really depends. The amount of energy that the dam produces, or 5,150 megawatts, it's significant. But just because the dam produces that much energy does not mean it's going to reach every nook and cranny of Ethiopia, right? Like we mentioned earlier, transmission lines or electric lines that take energy from the central grid to each and every household in rural areas, even in urban areas which don't have electric the transmission line connection. That's important, and that's a big infrastructure development that needs to go hand in hand with building dams, with producing powers, right? Making sure that the energy produced can reach each and every rural area. So in terms of limitation, yeah, we can have this significant amount of energy being produced, but unless the infrastructure side, unless the linking side, like making sure that there are transmission lines or electric lines that connect each and every rural area, each and every rural household to the main grid is there, it's not going to mean much. So there's a big homework to do in the sense of connecting rural areas, connecting each and every point of Ethiopia to the central grid so they can have the access. And that's what's going to make the difference. So it's like two sides of the equations. Yes, you need to increase your capacity to provide energy, but you also need to work on ways to enhance you also need to enhance the ways to how do we get this energy to each and every household that needs it, and that really depends on infrastructure.
And so you study in general, you're a water researcher, earth system sciences researcher. What stands out to you about this dam in terms of the way that it's been being built and operated, just compared to some of the research you've done on other projects like this?
So my work is mostly on how do we manage transboundary water resources sustainably and equitably. And my obviously my case study is the Nile River Basin. So in that sense, in the sense that the GERD is built on a transboundary river basin, transboundary river, a river that crosses political boundaries of countries. What's very apparent to me is besides the benefits of the obvious benefits that the GERD brings to Ethiopia, it's also a dam that could potentially be like a regional glue, right? Like what we know about this. We know the sort of benefits the GERD is going to produce. The GERD is going to the benefits that the GERD will have to these downstream countries. But I also see it as a big gateway for better management of the Nile, for more cooperative management of the Nile, for a more equitable use of the Nile, right? Like because right now we know the Nile, the so-called 1959 agreement allocates the entire flow of the Nile between two countries. We also know because of climate change, because of population increase, because of the increased demand that's going to come from this increasing population, and also the increased water demand that's coming from the growing economies of countries like Ethiopia, and not just Ethiopia, but also these other riparian countries, there is going to be extra stress on limited water resources, right? So I feel like the GERD has opened the gates of communication so that countries could come together and sort of deal with how we can manage the Nile more equitably, right? So there needs to be equitable and reasonable use by not just one or two countries, but all the countries in the basin. But also it brings into the conversation the idea of sustainability. How are we going to use this river sustainably, equitably, not just now, but also in the long term? Because unless we cooperate, unless there's an integrated and collaborative use of the basin, there's no way the rising demands for water are going to keep up with the limited supply we have. So I feel like beyond the benefits that the GERD has produced for Ethiopia and will continue to produce for Ethiopia, the regional benefits and the way it has become sort of like a status quo shaker, and how it has opened conversation about the equitable and reasonable use, and also long-term sustainable use in the basin. That's very apparent to me, and of course that's also my interest area, so that stands out to me.
And something that, people do mention as we're talking about the GERD is clean energy, right? The entire world talks about climate change, moving away from dirtier energy. So in that way, and maybe this might be a little bit outside of your expertise, but any insight that you can give on the fact that this is going to be clean energy and the impact that could have on the society?
Not at all. That is actually the crux of my research, right? Like one of the reasons we want to develop hydropower infrastructures in Ethiopia is because Ethiopia is particularly suited for hydropower development, right? So we have immense capacity just in the Blue Nile Basin, 30,000 megawatts of potential, 30,000 megawatts of hydropower energy can be produced, and overall in the country 45,000 megawatts of clean hydropower energy from water can be produced. So that's why in Ethiopia we focus on development of hydropower energy, because we have the potential for it, but more importantly as well, hydropower energy is a very clean source of energy. It's not like fossil fuel energy, which emits tons and tons of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So every kilowatt hour of energy that we're getting from hydropower is some amount of carbon dioxide that would have been emitted from burning fossil fuels, taken out of the environment, right? So in that sense, getting this huge amount of energy from GERD and from all the other hydropower dams in Ethiopia, it's a significant amount of potentially emitted greenhouse gases being removed from the environment because we're not getting that energy, this amount of energy, 5,000 megawatts of energy, by burning fossil fuels or by using this unclean or like you said, dirty sources of energy. So in that sense as well, it's pushing Ethiopia, and it is allowing Ethiopia to meet, let's say, its emission goals. It's allowing Ethiopia to reduce its carbon footprint. And also you can think about the environmental restoration and the soil and water conservation activities activities that have begun, especially after the first filling of the GERD. You can think about the green legacy. You can think about the soil and environmental restoration activities that are being carried across the country. That also is going to, of course, first of all, it's going to help the dam with sedimentation so that we can keep the soil in place. We can enhance the water capacity of our rivers, and also just the general environmental health of our ecosystems. So there's that. But also it's going to make Ethiopia more greener, in the sense that it's going to make the country as a whole more sustainable, right? It's going to make the country, it's going to ensure more rainfall in the future. It's going to ensure less sedimentation in the GERD, but also in all the other dams. It's going to increase the groundwater recharge. That is going to be like that. That's also an extra benefit when you work on soil and environmental conservation. We're going to reduce erosion. We're going to reduce deforestation. All that is going to also tap into the fight against climate change. The thing with access to electricity, or the thing with access to the thing with GERD is the benefits are not single streamed, right? Of course, the GERD is a hydropower dam, so its upfront benefit is going to be producing electricity. But because we're producing clean electricity, we're going to impact access to education, access to healthcare. We're impacting the fight and climate change. We're changing the quality of life on air, on land, underwater. We're changing the quality of life of people. We're increasing the energy access to industry so that we can enhance their efficiency. That's going to create more jobs, which create more decent lives. And so in this case, because the ripple effects of the dams are so diverse, we can basically tick off each and every one of the sustainable development goals that are set by the UN, right, for the entire world to achieve. So it's not just a hydropower dam. It is going to produce clean, affordable energy, but because we're developing clean, affordable energy, the ripple effect is going to move the country 1, 2, 3 steps forward in the right direction according to the Sustainable Development Goals. And these benefits are now also not limited to Ethiopia alone, because we're going to be exporting clean, affordable energy to neighboring countries. So most of the benefits that Ethiopia can expect from access to clean energy will also be available to these neighboring countries, right? So they can also move 1, 2, 3 steps forward in the right direction according to the sustainable goals, and that's how you move the world, a significant chunk of people, in the right direction if you really want to achieve these sustainable development goals. And the Nile River Basin carries close to 500 million people. Almost 460 million people live in the Nile Basin. So there's no way as a globe, right, we're going to achieve the sustainable development goals without helping the Nile River Basin. So that's why the GERD is not just a project that's important to Ethiopia or the Nile Basin. It's actually beneficial. If you think about it broadly, it's actually beneficial in terms of the global agendas as well, right? Because the Sustainable Development Goals is not an Ethiopian agenda. It's an agenda set by the UN. But because transformational projects such as this, well thought out projects such as this can have multiple ripple effects, that's how you move millions and millions of people forward. And this is not to say, again, the GERD is the silver bullet. The GERD alone is not going to help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but we would be moving forward in the right direction because of the impacts of the GERD, right? So its effects are beyond electricity. So climate change, you mentioned really well, access to energy, and generally a decent quality of life, which every single individual human being deserves just by virtue of being a human being, right?
And do you have a sense of whether there are metrics in place to track the sustainable development goals? I mean, you talked about a lot of different categories that this will actually have an impact on in terms of the environment and people's health. Do we have a sense of is there research being done on where things are now so we can track where they are later?
Yeah, so the Sustainable Development Goals have particular indicators. They call them indicators to measure sort of like where are we, let's say, with access to energy. So if we use those indicators to measure where Ethiopia was, let's say, in time X, and then where Ethiopia is in times Z, yeah, of course, we can clearly see, for example, where was Ethiopia in terms of all the sustainable development goals before GERD went online, and like, let's say 5 years, 10 years after GERD went online. So it's very easy to quantify them, but of course that's something to be done, right? Because we just started getting the benefits from GERD. So right now we can see, we see how we live, we see the quality of life, we see the access to electricity. So somewhere down the line, just using those indicators that the UN said, this is not a super difficult task because the indicators are there and they're globally agreed. So based on those metrics, we can have an objective analysis of how much GERD has helped. What we're talking about now is the potential GERD has, and what the real impact of that is going to be really depends on how it's operated, all the sites, like all the environmental protection, soil and water conservation activities that go around it. Like we mentioned earlier, the level of connection, electricity connectivity across the country, right? So there are other things to consider for GERD to be really useful, but the potential of it, like the capacity to impact change, it's really huge. And that's what the numbers that we were talking about, discussing earlier, really show you. But it really needs other side efforts as well to make those numbers a reality, right?
Right. And I know we're moving a little bit outside of the impact of the GERD, but because your research also studies transboundary water agreements, I want to get a sense of, what other water agreements or what other bodies of water projects can we learn from that have happened around the world in terms of how the use of this body of water is going to go and what needs to happen next?
There are plenty of both good and bad experiences to learn from. And I always say this, the Nile is not the only transboundary river in the world. We have 310 transboundary rivers and aquifers, groundwater resources that are shared by multiple countries across the world. So you can imagine, we've been dealing with how to manage transboundary water resources like since millennia, since 2,500 years before Christ. So we have a lot of experiences to learn from. My favorite experience is also because it's also from within the continent, is the Senegal River Basin and the Orange River Basin in Southern Africa. In the Senegal River Basin, 4 countries, Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, and Mauritania came together. These are 3 out of the 4 river basin countries after they had this drastic drought. They call it the Sahel drought. In the 70s, they came together, co-financed an infrastructure called the Manantali Dam, which now caters for the navigation demand, hydropower demand, irrigation demand of all of these 3 countries. That is such an exceptional, a world-class example of what collaboration between countries, what genuine collaboration, collaboration that is based on goodwill between countries can produce, right? So these, like the Senegal River Basin is a world-class example of what transboundary river management, what transboundary river management can be like. In Southern Africa, also between South Africa and Lesotho, there is this co-owned infrastructure, co-financed infrastructure that caters for the water demand of Lesotho, the hydropower demand of Lesotho and South Africa. There are many examples we can take the U.S., where the U.S. and Mexico on the Rio Grande River or the Colorado River, where they have this adaptive treaty, right? So like this treaty allocates the water between those 2 countries, but it doesn't stop there. It's flexible so that it adapts itself to changing circumstances. That could be climate change, that could be drought. So we can see treaties need to be evolving, right? So like we can learn that experience. So also in Southern America, there's another co-owned infrastructure, shared infrastructure between Paraguay and Uruguay. I don't want to get this wrong, but there is a co-owned infrastructure in Southern America where, because of the excess energy produced from that dam, it's called the La Plata River Basin. It caters for the hydropower demand, and the excess is exported, so that collaboration between these 2 countries is developed. We can take Europe, where they came together to clean up many of their rivers, most notably the Rhine River. We can take India and Pakistan, who came up with a really comprehensive Indus River Treaty, the Indus Valley Treaty, which survived even all-out wars between the two countries, which allows them to use the shared water equitably. There are experiences from Australia. There are other experiences from Asia. Not just good experiences, but also bad experiences of what not to do, how things can go wrong if managed differently. So there are plenty of experiences. But the thing is, transboundary river basins are very context-based, right? So whatever works in place A cannot be just brought in and just implemented in place B without taking the context of the basin into account. So what worked in the Senegal River Basin doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in the Nile Basin, but we can learn from other experiences and try to contextualize it for our basin. In our basin, we have years and years of historical trauma. We have gone to wars over this water. There's the baggage that's related with the colonial treaty and the so-called the agreements that monopolize the Nile water. All that has to be dealt with. This is what context means, right? So, for example, all this baggage may not be necessarily there in other basins. So we have to take into account the social psyche, the history, the trauma, the economic disparity between the countries, the kind of relationship, the dynamics between the two countries, right? But between the multiple countries in the basin. So yes, there are lessons to learn from other basins, but it has to be contextualized. And it's really, really important not to just like bring an experience that worked elsewhere and just copy paste it in the Nile Basin, right?
Okay.
That's really important.
So based on some of the examples you brought up, I'm just curious if you can give one or two examples of what not to do or where things went wrong, maybe because the issue was not fully considered.
Well, the Nile Basin is also full of things of what not to do, right?
Can you talk a little bit about the Nile Basin and where I mean, some of them may be things that we know, but I'm just curious from your expert perspective, where some of the issues with the Nile Basin went wrong, and then maybe compare it to somewhere else.
One major thing that I think is a big issue in the Nile Basin is this lack of inclusive agreement. So if you look at the history in the Nile Basin, all the way from the early 19th century, 1891, and even before that, even though it was not codified in terms of law, the colonizers at the time, the protectorates at the time, really made sure that their interests, we're talking about the UK, France, Italy, Congo, they were making sure that their colonial interests were not sort of jeopardized. So in that sense, because they were looking out for their own and not necessarily the basin as a whole, right? There's this tradition, or there's this trend in the Nile Basin where uninclusive agreements have been signed. Most notably the 1929 agreement, which divides the water, signed between the UK and England, which divides the water solely between Sudan and Egypt, and then the 1959 agreement, which completely, fully utilizes the water between Sudan and Egypt. So this sense of not being included, the sense of not thinking about everyone as a serious owner of the Nile, or not thinking, or this idea that not every country has an equitable share from the Nile River Basin, I think is fundamentally wrong, and that's one of the major things that needs to be corrected in the Nile Basin. That's why the CFA, the Cooperative Framework Agreement, becomes very monumental. For the first time in the history of the Nile Basin, not just one, not two, not three, not just colonial powers, but all the countries in the basin came together, discussed how to use the water, right? So that reinforces the idea that each and every country has an equitable share from the river, and each and every country has a stake, has a say in the management of the river. So like this tendency to exclude countries, that was a big problem. I mentioned in this Valley Treaty between India and Pakistan, that is actually one of the experiences that shows you how well-meant third-party involvement, external actor involvement, can actually help produce some meaningful agreement. But we have seen in the Nile Basin this intervention.
I'm curious, in India and Pakistan, who was the third-party mediator?
The World Bank.
The World Bank. Okay,
Yes.
and how did that go?
The incentive, there was a big incentive from the World Bank monetary incentive, of course, from the World Bank in pushing these countries to come to an agreement. And in their case, it was very productive because they came up with an agreement that was beneficial to both of them. And you see the impact because even when these two countries were all out in war, that agreement stayed. That's a solid agreement which both of these countries believe in. When we come to the Nile Basin, external influence hasn't been very helpful, right? Because I think, in my opinion, because it doesn't consider the context and it just tries to reinforce the current status quo. So there's a big disparity, right? The external actor didn't change, but the context in which it's acting is changing. So we really need to tweak what we do and how we do it to the context in the basin. I can go ahead and mention several others, but I guess these two things can give you perspective.
Right. That this really speaks to what you're saying, context. You know, we talk about third-party mediators, not so great for Africa in general, but then you see that, the World Bank may have been fine in terms of India and Pakistan. And part of that, I imagine, is because of what agreements may have already been in place, some of which from the colonial era. So I'm curious if there have been other bodies of water, transboundary water agreements that were impacted by old colonial era agreements that were there to begin with.
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. I don't think there is a basin in the world that has as much colonial baggage as the Nile does, right? It also has to do with the history of we have ancient countries who were not like made hundreds of years ago, but who were there for thousands of years, whose existence literally dependent on the water. You can mention the Egyptian civilization, the Sudanese civilization, the Meroe civilization, the Ethiopian civilizations, right? So these are ancient countries whose history is closely tied to the river, right? So I think because of the length of our history too, we have a lot of baggage that we carry. So nothing comes to mind for me when I think about historical trauma, historical baggage, colonial power. No, the Nile is like a great example of how that really impacts the current dynamics between the countries, even stances between the countries, right? Nothing comes to mind. But I mean, we don't need other examples to see how messed up or how this colonial baggage or historical trauma is really an impediment to collaborative use.
Absolutely. I mean, it's dragging it out, right? The project started in 2011. We still haven't really come up with any sort of agreements in terms of the dam or the filling of the dam. In the case of Senegal and the dam that the four countries in that area shared, how quickly did agreements push forward once the initiation of coming to an agreement started?
Relatively quickly, and transboundary agreements are not quick in the sense that it takes countries to come together, countries to come to an understanding. So they're not like works of a few months or like. So it does take time, but in the Senegal River Basin, relatively quickly, they formed this. They call it the Senegal River Basin Organization, OMVS in French. So that. They formed that organization, that river basin organization, and that's a very, very strong organization in the sense that it has power to impact change. And then because they also had this shared sort of damage, trauma from this Sahel drought, right? Like each and every country suffered a lot, and they had this common understanding. Okay, this should not happen, and this damage from this drought should not happen again. Okay, what do we do? They came together, came up with this Manantali Dam, and a Manantali Dam is just one experience from the basin. They have a lot of other experiences to learn from in terms of managing the water, soil, and environmental conservation, even in how the countries deal with themselves. There's no there isn't this dismissive attitude of like neglecting the need of one country while highlighting the need of the other. No, there's a very solid relationship with the countries. Also helps because also these countries were all French colonies, right? So they have that shared history. So that in that basin, they sort of utilized everything that brings them together, right? To help them come to an agreement rather than focusing on things that pull them apart. They capitalized on what they have. And in the Nile Basin, it seems that there is a lot that could bring us together, but we seem to focus on what pulls us apart, which isn't really helping.
Right. We don't necessarily have the shared trauma that you talked about. We don't have the same colonizing country. We don't have, there are some differences which are in and of themselves a bad thing, but when it comes to trying to come to an agreement, it proves to be a challenge. So that organization that was formed in the agreement in the basin around Senegal, was that a coalition of people that represented all 4 countries that were involved in that? And could you see something like that happening around the Nile Basin, although it doesn't seem like there's one yet?
No, for sure. So river basin organization is basically an authority on the basin. So anything that has to do with the management of the basin, that's the authority you go to, if it's proper, like if it's a powerful river basin organization. And when the CFA, the Cooperative Framework Agreement, was being negotiated, the idea was that we have the NBI, right, the Nile Basin Initiative. The Nile Basin Initiative was supposed to be a transitory organization. And when the CFA was signed and ratified by 6 countries and made into a law, then NBI would transition into the Nile Basin Commission, which would serve as a legal, like a proper river basin organization. So we do have the starting point for a strong river basin organization in the Nile. And the NBI has done significant, like really important and really powerful research, really powerful work in terms of public diplomacy, in terms of developing the communication between countries. But it's not the proper river basin organization, the Nile Basin Commission, which it was supposed to transition to, because the CFA is basically stalled, right? And we do need 6 countries to ratify it. Up to now, 4 countries, 5 countries actually, include Uganda ratified it a few years back. That made 4, and now South Sudan. There's talk of South Sudan also wanting to ratify the CFA. So once 6 countries sign it, ratify it, and makes it into a law, then that becomes the law of the Nile Basin, the law of the land, and that will usher in the development of the Nile Basin Commission, and that would be our river basin organization. But in the meantime, there's NBI.
11 need to ratify it.
No, just 6.
So 6 out of the 11 in the Nile Basin. Yeah. Which 5 have done it?
So 6 have signed it. Ethiopia have signed and ratified it. Kenya have signed and ratified it. Tanzania have signed and ratified it. Rwanda as well. Uganda signed it, ratified it a few years back. So
we're just missing 1 more for it to actually move forward.
Yeah, I hope I'm not mistaken, but yeah, I know for sure Ethiopia ratified it, Uganda did. Maybe Kenya, I'm not sure. They did sign it, but so 4 ratified it, 6 signed it, so maybe not Kenya. Yeah,
it's okay. It's a good starting base for us. I mean, the fact that that's what needs to happen.
No, it's huge, of course. Like especially as a like I said earlier, as a framework where not just 1, not just 2, but all countries came together and negotiated, it is a significant piece of legislation. And not to mention, it also puts the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization as the foundation, as the basis for water use in the Nile Basin, which is a big departure from our historical way of utilizing the water, which is monopolistic way of utilizing the water and basically disregarding the rights, the share of other countries. So that's such a big drastic shift as well.
Yeah, so that organization, that coalition, once enough countries ratify it, they're basically going to be working with each other, right, to figure this out. There's not going to be maybe much of a third-party mediator. And I'm just also curious, in some of the examples you brought up in South America, we talked about India and Pakistan and the World Bank playing a role in that. But in some of the other examples you brought up, how often is a third-party mediator a part of getting through those agreements, and how often are the countries just talking to each other or building a coalition that represents all the countries involved?
It really depends on the context. For example, between the US and Mexico, I am not aware of any third-party involvement. It was just these 2 countries coming together. I think third-party involvements are more dominant when we talk about river basins, especially in developing countries. Think about Asia, think about Africa. Yeah, so it really depends on the context. But, well, the third-party involvement also comes from the need for finance or the need for like an external negotiator when countries don't get along. So it really depends on the context. Yeah, I think that's the short answer.
Great. There's actually a comment that just came in. I want to give you a chance to elaborate and explain. Joseph Biru asks or requests, please discuss the regional power grid, the East Africa power pool, and its eventual region-wide and intercontinental significance of power export and usage beyond Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's another brilliant point to make, right? So the Eastern African power pool, it's sort of trade between Eastern African countries, right? And this is trade of clean, affordable energy. Right now, we you know about the data, right? Ethiopia exports energy to Kenya, to Sudan, to Djibouti, right? And so it's going to expand at the Eastern African power pool. And the GERD, just by virtue of being a renewable source of energy, increases the stock of renewable energy power points. So that means there's going to be more to export. There's going to be more interconnection between countries, and it's a tried and tested method. This integrating countries by trade, by necessity, right? When countries are integrated with need, where countries are interconnected with trade, interest-based, mutually based interests, they tend to get along. You can look at Europe, you can look at the United States, the states themselves, right? So the Eastern African power pool, it starts with trade in electricity, but it can grow into further economic and then further political integration between African countries, and that can be a seed for the Pan-Africanism that we imagine, right? This is how you integrate countries. You can't force countries to come together, but need-based, interest-based, mutually symbiotic relationships, right? I give you this, you give me this. So Ethiopia exports electricity, other countries get cheap energy, right? Especially like we can take the situation with Djibouti. Ethiopia exports electricity, we get access to a port. Symbiotic relationships. So the Eastern African power pool, it's a trading scheme, energy, clean, affordable, and very relatively cheap energy trading between countries, but that can grow into further economic relationship, economic collaboration, and further can be the basis for further political collaboration. And that's a significant thing.
So the East Africa power pool, what exactly is that? Is that a group? Is that an agreement?
It's a coalition between countries, basically. It's an agreement or an understanding, or like a framework for countries to trade with each other, electricity-wise.
Great. Okay. That's okay. I'm so glad Joseph brought that up. I'm going to use the last 10 minutes or so of your time to go through some of the comments. And so if you guys have questions or comments that you want Mekdelawit to respond to, please feel free to put them in the comment section. Somebody, Mangesha said, and you may or may not have an answer to this, but I want to put it out there. I heard previously about 90% of issues on the GERD are agreed to. What are the remaining points pending on the tripartite negotiation? Is that I assume that means as it relates to the GERD?
Yeah. So what are the pending issues? One of them is what to do in case of droughts or extended times of dry years, right? So what do we do in case we have 3-4 years, consecutive years of dry years, or when we have below average rainfall, or when the flow of the Blue Nile is below average? So there hasn't been a consensus on what to do, because right now, at least from my understanding, there seems to be this assumption that because Ethiopia is the dam owner, the responsibility to cater for or to provide extra water in times of need or in times of drought for these downstream countries tend to be on the shoulders of Ethiopia, which is a big no-no for Ethiopia, of course, because drought is a natural phenomenon. We can't do anything about it, and it's a situation, a natural situation, a natural circumstance that is apparent on all countries, not just downstream countries, but also on Ethiopia. So the idea is that the responsibility of what to do during drought times should be a shared responsibility, and that the burden should not necessarily be on Ethiopia. But As things stand now, it's Ethiopia should release this and that amount of water. Ethiopia should do the level of the dam should be lowered to this and that amount. So all the burden seems, all the responsibility of catering for drought management seems to be on the shoulder of Ethiopia, and there needs to be some kind of reciprocal shared responsibility in that sense. So what to do during drought times, that's one sticking point. How do we resolve issues? So dispute resolution mechanisms, that's another sticking point. Even though the Declaration of Principles, the DOP, clearly states how disputes should be resolved between the countries, apparently that seems to be another sticking point when it comes to the GERD. So what do we do? Do we resolve it between ourselves, or do we go to do our heads of states resolve it? Do we invite a third party mediator, or do we do arbitration? So basically court style. So that seems to be another sticking point. So from my understanding, it's major, like these two are like the major sticking points, and rightly so, because especially as far as the drought resolution, what to do during drought times is concerned, that borderline infringes on water allocation and trying to trying to link operation of the filling and operation of the GERD with broader water allocation issues. So it's a bit tricky. Another thing is, I guess this could be a third thing, but these downstream countries seek legally binding agreements from Ethiopia, whereas on the Ethiopian side, there's this idea that it should be guidelines and rules for the operation of the dam, and not so much strict guidance, treaties. Again, the Declaration of Principle. The full name is Declaration of Principles, Guidelines and Rules for Operation and Filling of the Dam. So like there's the nomenclature for the kind of direction we should go is already stipulated in the DOP. But again, should it be guidelines or rules, or should it be a binding agreement? That also seems to be another sticking point. Even I genuinely think these are not major sticking points, but they seem to be the sticking points in the negotiation. Yeah.
Right. And possibly some of it is a little bit politically charged, and that's why they're being blown out of proportion, possibly.
Can I clear something up? So I just looked up who signed the CFA because I don't want to mislead people.
Okay.
So Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda have signed and ratified it. Kenya has signed it, has not ratified it yet. South Sudan, there was a talk of South Sudan wanting to ratify the CFA too. So we have 4 countries who have made it into a law. We need 2 more. Great. Apologies earlier for...
I'm glad we cleared that up. Plenty of time. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a fast session, try to get some of these answers. If it's a short answer, it's fine. You can do it, and we'll just keep moving. Is Abai considered a cross-country river?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, done. There you go, Michael. Question answered. Will the dam have any effect or issue on fishing?
It's going to enhance fishing, especially in Ethiopia. Yeah.
How so?
Because we have this huge artificial lake that wasn't there before, and we expect around 7,000 tons of fishery every year, which is a huge thing, because fishing already in Ethiopia is not a big industry, but it can be a big industry. So yes.
How does that work? So you create a dam and it creates a new body of water, but where does the fish come from?
From the water. Well, it's a new ecosystem that's being formed. So you can either introduce fish into the water. That's one way, but also nature has a way of sort of forming, like when there's water, and then when there's a new ecosystem forming around, nature has a way of populating itself. So.
Wow. Okay. Fascinating. Did not know that. Thank you. Is another dam in the near future a possibility? And maybe this can also open up a conversation about some of the other dams that you think are significant. Of
course, the GERD is only the beginning. There are multiple dams planned and also already under construction. So you can think about the Koisha Dam, which is the 4th cascade on the Omogibe River Basin, that's going to produce 2,160 megawatts. There are other plants which are under feasibility check, right? So the Mandaya Dam, Kobo. The GERD is only the beginning. Ethiopia has a lot of work to do in the sense of capitalizing on its resources. So of course there are other dams in the near future. it's not a possibility, it's a reality.
The reality. Okay, love it. There's a few more that came in. What might be a possible danger that can come from the GERD?
From GERD, for who? So I'm guessing this is a question from downstream countries. So like justified questions which were raised especially during the early stages of the dam, but that have been answered already. But for the sake of the question here, let's raise them. So there was this big threat of security because the dam is really close to Sudan. There was a justified question from Sudan in terms of how safe is the dam, how are we going to do. But this is already a question that has been raised and answered many years ago, justifiably. So like there's no threats that the dam is going to fail, for example. That has already been cleared. There needs to be collaboration and communication with the countries in terms of how to manage the water and all that. But as far as security, safety measures of the dam, that's there. No, the GERD is the safest dam in the basin by far. It's built with the most the state of the art design and construction, and even like ministers from other countries have already testified that the GERD is by far safer than any of the dams that are existing in the basin. So there is security questions. These questions were raised especially during the early days, and justifiably so, but this has already been raised and dealt with, right?
Great. There's another question that somewhat relates to that. Miko says, any views on how transparent the use of the power produced will be, and so how transparent should the power use and the process, and a little bit of what you were saying, I think it touches on what you were just saying, the safety of the dam be?
But again, there is no question on the safety of the dam. The dam is safe there. So like let's put
Right.
that on how power is going to be produced. So there's the building of the dam, and then there's the operating part of the dam, right? So the operating part of the dam is not, let's say, my purview. It's like how it's going to operate it, at what efficiency, like the in and outs of like the practical day-to-day operations of the dam. That's not my purview, and I would hope it would be as transparent as it could be, but that's not a thing that I can comment on. I don't have any information on that.
Great. Okay, there's more questions, so we'll keep it moving. So what about Emmanuel? Let me pull it up. Says, you already said the ultimate social benefit of the dam depends on the development of distribution infrastructure. Can you comment on the wastage or efficient use of generated power?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's always energy wasted from production up until it reaches utilization, right? So there's some amount of energy that's wasted in the transmission line, some amount of energy that's wasted when transferring energy from the grid to each household. These are there are mechanisms of reducing the efficiency, but again, not my purview. But it's an important topic to consider for those who actually study this area on how we can reduce the wastage, of course. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, well, maybe we'll have somebody on to get into a little bit of that. Okay, Joseph again. Kenya just signed a power purchase agreement with Ethiopia, quote, first 3 years, maximum firm capacity of 200 megawatts, and thereafter a maximum capacity of 400 megawatts for the remainder of the 25-year PPA. For those of us who are not experts and study it like Joseph a little bit, or you, what does that mean? What does this agreement mean?
It just means that we're going to export energy for Kenya. So, like I mentioned earlier when we started, it's very cheap to produce energy in Ethiopia because our topography is very suitable. The topography and also the amount of rain and the way our rivers are structured. It's very easy. It's very cheap to produce energy in Ethiopia. So it's actually beneficial for these countries to export energy from Ethiopia than produce it themselves, right? So this is a cost benefits analysis. Should I build a dam on my own land and produce an expensive electricity, or should I get this cheap electricity from Ethiopia? And clearly, they made the choice to export from Ethiopia 200 megawatts. That's not a small amount to disregard. That's like a small one of our dams here. 400 megawatts. That's the amount of, let's say, what's our dam here? 400, Tekaze is 300 megawatts. Danabeles is 460 megawatts. So these are significant amount of energy for Kenya to import and for Ethiopia to produce, to export. But beyond the export of electricity, just imagine the kind of economic integration that this is going to create between Ethiopia and Kenya, and even further, right? So
yes, and so Kenya is agreed to 200 megawatts, and to connect it back to what you said earlier about the two turbines producing over 500 megawatts, which means over 47 million people, 7 million households. Obviously, these are, rough estimates would be powered. So what Kenya is getting is significant, just to reiterate the point you just made. Another comment, how is agriculture affected? How does agriculture in other countries affected by this dam?
That's a bit of a broad question. So taking Ethiopia, for example, the GERD is not built for irrigation development. The primary purpose of the GERD is for hydropower. So we can leave Ethiopia out of it. But taking Sudan, for example, downstream Sudan, irrigation capacity for Sudan is going to be increased because the GERD is going to provide a steady flow of water throughout the year, which enhances irrigation capacity. So agriculture can be enhanced. There's something called recession agriculture in Sudan, which really depends on the ebb and flow of the Nile River. That is going to be impacted negatively in the sense that the flooding of the Nile will be reduced because of the dam. So, right, like we're going to store the flood, the high flows of the river, and then release a steady amount of water. So recession agriculture, I've seen Sudanese researchers also mention this. Recession agriculture in Sudan would be affected, but the pro would be irrigated agriculture would be enhanced. So
okay, I'm going to pull this comment up. I don't necessarily agree with it, but let's pull it up just to clear it up. We don't avoid questions about the Egyptian threat, if there is any, right? It's a legitimate question. Mooney says most Arabic stations talk about the issue. Why not clear up the peanut gallery? So let's talk about it. What are some of the valid concerns that Egypt has, and how is that mitigated, or what issues are still remain to be solved?
Well, this technically this has been researched, and it has been cleared already that the dam is not going to affect sort of the use in Egypt. But the question with Egyptian fear, or like the fear felt in Egypt and in general downstream countries, in my opinion, has to do with the shifting status quo, right? The GERD does allow Ethiopia a sense of control over the Nile, right? The GERD, like I mentioned earlier, does open the door for more equitable and reasonable discussion. And these are things that were not there in the previous era in the basin, right? The whole question of equitable and reasonable use is now at the forefront. Equitable and reasonable use and the current status quo in the basin, these two things don't go together. So in my opinion, the question about GERD in relation to Egypt and Sudan is not GERD, but the broader workings in the Nile Basin, right? This sense of loss of the status quo, the sense of changing, shifting control or shift and hegemony in the Nile Basin, and that's, in my opinion, this is something we have to be ahead of before problems arise in the basin, and then we're sort of playing catch up, right? Like I mentioned earlier, population is going to increase, not just in Ethiopia, not just in Egypt, but in all Nile Basin countries. With population increase, with economic growth, there's going to be an increase in demand. So what happens when you have a rising demand, ever increasing demand, and a limited amount of water? Each country's, be Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, everybody's going to want to develop their water resources. What happens when these upstream countries are consumptively using the water? And forget GERD, because GERD is a hydropower dam. But what happens when you start building consumptive consumptive dams, such as dams that use the water for irrigation, dams that use the water for domestic water use, right? That actually takes water out of the system, which means the amount of water that is going to reach downstream Egypt and Sudan is going to change, and that is the real problem. And that's something we have to get ahead of and try to find a meaningful, collaborative, equitable, mutually beneficial problem with. And I think that's the bigger problem, and not so much the GERD. So I don't know what the what the earlier question was about peanuts and galleries, or like.
Yeah, I think they were just saying let's address the fear regardless.
Yeah, I agree. It should be addressed, but this is my opinion. Well, that's how I see it.
It's a shift from the status quo. There's a lot of comments, not as many questions here, so I'm going to start to give you a chance to close it up. One more. Let's see. Kamite says, will GERD come to the White Nile Basin? I'm going to give my interpretation of this question here. We're talking about the GERD. We're talking about the Blue Nile. Is there any connection to the White Nile Basin?
Well, I mean, the Nile has two major tributaries, the Blue Nile and then the White Nile. So, and these two tributaries mix in Sudan or join in Sudan and then flow as one Nile. As far as the GERD is concerned, the GERD is built on the Blue Nile portion of Ethiopia. So in that sense, it's not connected to the White Nile Basin. But in terms of ripple effects, in terms of connecting countries of the White Nile together, in terms of the benefits spilling over to the White Nile basins, yeah, I think so.
Great. This is, I believe, my last question. I want to connect it back to the topic that we came into this conversation with, which is the second turbine that is powered. Is there a sense of the timeline for the third turbine? And is there any connection to the filling? I mean, this is happening on the, I don't know if the filling is complete or if it's still underway, but it seems like it may be connected to that. Can you walk us through a little bit on that?
So I've heard officials on TV saying the GERD is expected to be fully completed in the next 2.5 years. So that is great news. And so whatever filling is going to happen next really is going to keep up with the construction of the civil construction of the dam. And yes, you're right. The third filling is happening. Again, officials have already said around 22 billion cubic meters of water is held in the dam. A total of 22 billion cubic meters of water is held in the dam from all the three fillings. And I've seen also on Twitter, people are waiting for the overflow, which essentially signals the end of the third filling. So yeah, the filling is happening. The dam is expected to be done according to the official information we heard in 2.5 years, and subsequent fillings will basically follow the rate of construction of the dam.
Interesting. Okay, so a lot to look forward to. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you? Maybe a question that you see a lot, or a misconception that you see a lot out there about the GERD that you want to take a chance to address?
Yeah, I mean, I am a huge advocate for GERD. I do believe in the transformative power of GERD, and for example, the numbers I showed you earlier, that's the potential of GERD. We should not conflate this with actual reality, though. GERD is not a silver bullet. Like I keep saying, GERD is only the beginning. We do need a lot more. There's a lot of.
Ooh, no. All right, guys, if it doesn't come back, if Mekdelawit's connection doesn't come back, we may just go ahead and wrap up here. Let's give it a minute to see if she comes back again. If you're just joining us, you can go back and watch it from the beginning later, but we are talking about a new announcement from Ethiopia regarding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissiance Dam. The second turbine is now producing energy, and we were talking to Mekdelawit Deribe, a water researcher and Earth Systems Science PhD candidate, about what it means that the second turbine is producing power. The first two combined are now able to produce about 500 or more than 500 megawatts of power, and that combined could power 47 million people, which, if you're talking about a household of 5 or 6, that's 7 million households. So really huge moment for Ethiopia today. The Prime Minister, along with many government officials, had an inauguration event in Ethiopia on Wednesday, congratulating the people of Ethiopia of this moment in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissiance Dam development. A huge deal, but as Mekdelawit said, a lot of infrastructure development needs to be put in place for this to have the kind of impact that it has, but still a huge moment to celebrate nonetheless. All right, it looks like we may have lost Mekdelawit, so we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for your amazing questions, for your comments, and we will see you next time.